In the heat of the summer of 1989, a silence fell over the Adirondack wilderness. 14-year-old Boy Scout Eric Langford vanished there without warning, leaving no trace behind. What followed became one of the most extensive search efforts the region had ever seen, yet the forest gave nothing back. After 3 relentless weeks, officials spoke the words no parent should hear. Eric was presumed dead. His family was left suspended in uncertainty, trapped between hope and grief. Years passed in unanswered prayers. Then, in the autumn of 2001, a stranger stepped into an Albany police station and spoke a name long buried by time. He said he was Eric Langford. What sounded like delusion was confirmed by science. DNA proved the impossible. The boy lost 12 years earlier was alive. And when he began to speak, investigators realized they were standing at the edge of one of the darkest abduction cases in American criminal history. Before the wilderness swallowed him, Eric was unremarkable in the way only peaceful lives can be. He was a suburban teenager, an 8th grader who loved baseball and building model planes. His parents remembered him as steady and well-mannered, a boy who followed rules and caused no concern. That July marked his first journey to Boy Scout camp, a 2-week initiation into nature, set deep within the vast Adirondack forest, one of the largest protected landscapes in the eastern United States. The camp lay far from civilization, nearly 40 miles from the closest town, spread across 200 acres surrounding Black Pond. 50 boys between 12 and 16 lived there under the supervision of 6 instructors. Their days were filled with hiking, navigation drills, survival lessons, and rock climbing. Eric arrived on July 17 with 7 other boys, unaware that the forest would soon test the limits of fate. Their group was guided by David Harrison, a veteran outdoorsman with 2 decades of experience working with children. The first week unfolded peacefully. Eric joined every activity, bonded with his peers, and mailed brief letters home describing fishing trips and songs sung beside the fire. Instructors described him as focused and reliable. There were no warnings. No shadows. Nothing to suggest what was coming. That same evening, warm and cloudless, the group prepared for a traditional overnight hike. Packs were checked. Supplies counted. Just before departure, Harrison realized water had been overlooked. The stream was close, only 200 meters away, along a path worn smooth by countless footsteps. Eric volunteered without hesitation. Carrying 2-gallon-sized plastic containers, he disappeared into the trees. Harrison watched him go. That moment marked the last time Eric Langford was seen as a free boy. Minutes stretched into unease. 20 passed. Eric did not return. 2 older scouts were sent to look for him. They came back quickly, shaken, saying he was nowhere, neither by the stream nor on the trail. Harrison rushed out himself. At the water's edge, he found the containers. One stood upright, full and untouched. The other lay empty on its side. There were no marks of struggle. No cries. Only absence, as if the forest had quietly claimed him. The alarm spread fast. By nightfall, instructors searched with flashlights, calling Eric's name into the dark. Police arrived within hours. Dogs followed his scent from the stream, but after 300 meters over jagged rock, the trail weakened and vanished, not abruptly, but as though his steps had slowly dissolved from the earth. At dawn, the official search began. Sheriff Robert Mitchell of Essex County took command, coordinating a massive effort that drew more than 200 volunteers, locals, tourists, college students. Helicopters scanned from above with thermal cameras. Divers searched every lake and pond within miles. The forest was divided and redivided, combed inch by inch. Days turned into weeks. Still, nothing formed a complete picture. Fragments emerged instead. A mile from camp, a small shoe print matching Eric's size led deeper into increasingly hostile terrain. 2 days later, a scrap of blue fabric was found tangled in a bush, similar in color to Eric's shirt, yet impossible to confirm. Each discovery raised questions but offered no answers. Eric's parents arrived early in the search and refused to leave. They slept in a tent near the command center, joined daily search teams, taped posters to trees, and spoke to every camera offered. Linda Langford told reporters she could feel her son was alive, that a mother, best knowing, could not be wrong. Robert said little. His face grew hollow from exhaustion as he walked the woods endlessly, calling Eric's name until his voice failed him. By the end of the 3rd week, the truth could no longer be softened. 50 square miles had been searched twice. There was no sign of the boy. At a somber press conference, Sheriff Mitchell admitted what everyone feared: the chances of finding Eric alive were almost non-existent. With visible emotion, he announced the suspension of active search efforts and reclassified the case as an open missing person investigation. For the Langfords, life did not move forward, it stalled. There was no body to mourn, no grave to stand beside, no final farewell. Only unanswered questions. Robert returned to work. Linda carried her certainty in silence. And somewhere beyond understanding, the story of Eric Langford remained unfinished, waiting for the moment it would rise again into the light. He returned to his job as an accountant, but those who worked beside him said the man who came back was only a faint outline of who he once had been. Grief had hollowed him out. Linda, meanwhile, could not bring herself to cross the threshold of Eric's bedroom. Nothing inside was ever moved. The bed stayed neatly made. Model airplanes rested on their shelf. Schoolbooks remained stacked on the desk, frozen in time. She kept the door shut, and every time she passed it, the weight of loss broke through her. The years moved on, but the wound did not close. As time slipped by, the disappearance of Eric Langford settled into the archives of unresolved cases. From time to time, rumors resurfaced. Someone swore they had seen a boy who looked like Eric in Canada. Another claimed a frightened teenager had asked for help at a gas station in Vermont. Each lead was pursued. Each collapsed under scrutiny. Eventually, the world let the story fade, everyone except Eric's parents and a handful of investigators who could never quite let go. Then came October 3, 2001. A cold, rain-soaked morning. A man pushed open the doors of the Albany police station. Sergeant Thomas Coleman, working the front desk that day, later said the man looked barely held together. He was painfully thin, his skin drained of color, his beard thick and untrimmed, his hair long and neglected. His clothes hung off him as if borrowed from someone larger, loose jeans cinched with a rope, a faded gray sweatshirt stretched thin with age. His sneakers were so worn the soles were peeling away. Despite the warmth inside the station, he trembled uncontrollably. He approached the desk and spoke so softly it was almost a breath. Yet the words burned themselves into Coleman's memory. He said his name was Eric Langford. He said he had vanished from a Boy Scout camp 12 years earlier. And he said he needed protection, because whatever had taken him once might come back for him again. Coleman's first instinct was disbelief. The station saw its share of people gripped by delusions, pleading for safety from invisible enemies. But when he met the man's eyes, doubt crept in. There was no confusion there. No haze. Only sharp awareness, pierced through with raw, animal terror. Coleman asked him to sit and began methodically asking questions. The man answered without hesitation. His birthdate, March 23, 1975. His childhood address in Albany. His parents' names, Robert and Linda Langford. Coleman entered the information into the system. A missing persons report from 1989 surfaced on the screen. The photograph of the 14-year-old boy looked nothing like the gaunt figure sitting across from him. And yet, there were echoes. The curve of the nose. The line of the chin. The way the ears sat against the head. Enough to make Coleman pick up the phone and call a detective. Detective Karen Pfizer from the Juvenile Division arrived shortly after. She began a preliminary interview, recording every word. The man told his story again. He said he had been taken from the camp and held captive for 12 years in the surrounding forest. He said the man who imprisoned him, Charles Daniels, was now dead or close to it, and that this was the only reason he had been able to escape. Pfizer tested him. She asked about the camp. His answers came easily, vividly. He described the lake's position, the color of the cabins, the instructor's name, David Harrison, even the nickname of the cook's dog, Buster. None of it appeared in public reports. These were details locked away in memory, inaccessible to imposters. A DNA test was ordered immediately. Blood samples were drawn and compared to material preserved in the original case file, samples Eric's parents had given long ago, just in case the unthinkable happened. 48 hours later, the results arrived. There was no margin for doubt. The match was absolute. The man was Eric Langford. The news spread like wildfire. Television stations cut into regular programming with urgent bulletins. Reporters flooded the streets. Police located Eric's parents and delivered the message. Linda collapsed as the words reached her. Robert could not form a sentence. He repeated the same word again and again, as if anchoring himself to it. Alive. 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 The following day, they were brought to the station. The reunion was carefully arranged, overseen by detectives and a psychologist. Linda stepped into the room first. When she saw him, she stopped cold. She stared, searching the fragile man before her for traces of the child she had lost. Slowly, she moved closer. She lifted her hand and touched his face. Eric broke down. Linda wrapped her arms around him, and they held each other, crying without restraint, time collapsing in on itself. Robert stood beside them, shaking, his voice gone, watching the impossible unfold, the return of the one the world had already buried. Yet the miracle of their reunion carried a heavy shadow. The relief of finding Eric alive was quickly eclipsed by what he revealed next. He said he needed to speak now, that if he stayed silent, the words might never come. What he carried inside felt urgent, fragile, as though time itself might erase it if he waited. Eric began where everything broke, July 17, 1989. He described walking to the stream to collect water. One canister was filled and placed carefully on the bank. As he began filling the second, a voice rose behind him. Nothing felt wrong. The man spoke easily, confidently, like any adult meant to be trusted. Eric declined the offer of help, saying he could handle it. The man nodded, then casually mentioned something nearby, an old cave once used by Native Americans, marked with ancient drawings. He said it was only a few minutes away. Close enough to see and return before anyone noticed. A story worth telling his friends. Eric hesitated. The man didn't push. He simply spoke, gently, as if sharing a harmless suggestion. Eric agreed. He left the second canister behind, intending to grab it on the way back, and followed. They walked deeper into the forest. 10 minutes passed. Eric began to feel uneasy and suggested turning around. The man assured him they were almost there. Then the path ended. They stepped into a small clearing. Without warning, the man spun around. In his hand was a stun gun. Eric never had the chance to cry out. There was a flash of pain, then nothing. He woke in darkness. His head throbbed violently. His wrists and ankles were bound with rope. Beneath him was a hard wooden floor, damp, sour with the smell of mold. He tried to shout, but his throat betrayed him. Only a weak sound escaped. No one answered. Hours passed. The man sat Eric down and finally gave his name, Charles Daniels. Daniels told him this was where he would live now. He said the outside world was gone, that a war had devastated the cities, leaving almost no survivors. He claimed he had rescued Eric just in time, taking him before destruction reached the camp. He said Eric's parents were dead. That there was no one searching. Nowhere left to return to. Eric refused to believe him. He screamed. He cried. He begged to go home. Daniels listened patiently, then handed him a newspaper. It was real. A July 1989 edition of the New York Times. On the front page was an article about a missing Boy Scout in the Adirondacks. The search, it said, was ongoing, but hope was fading. Daniels pointed to it and spoke calmly. They are looking for you, he said. But they will never find you. Here, you are safe, if you obey. That was when the rules began. Eric was told he would work. Chopping wood. Hauling water. Cooking meals. Checking traps scattered through the forest. He was warned to stay quiet, to follow instructions, to never attempt escape. Daniels said the woods would kill him before he ever reached another human. Wild animals. swamps with no solid ground. Death waiting in every direction. When Eric asked what would happen if he disobeyed, Daniel stared at him for a long time. Then he answered, evenly, without anger or threat. "Then you will die." He said it as a certainty. And Eric believed him. The first months were unbearable. Every thought circled back to escape. But the house stood swallowed by forest, surrounded by dense, hostile wilderness. The dirt road that had brought him there vanished into trees, as if it had never truly existed. And slowly, painfully, Eric began to understand the truth of his prison. The forest itself had become the walls. Eric tried to map the forest in his mind, but Daniels made sure there was never space for planning. Whenever they left the house to check the traps, Eric was sent ahead while Daniels stayed several steps behind, a rifle always within reach. Any hesitation, any drift from the narrow path, was shut down instantly. Discipline was not frequent, but when it came, it was unforgettable. During his first month, Eric made one desperate attempt to flee. Late at night, he slipped through the door and ran blindly into the trees. He had gone barely 100 meters when a gunshot cracked through the darkness. The bullet slammed into a tree inches from his head. Eric stopped cold. Daniels caught him moments later, dragged him back by the collar, and threw him into the basement. 3 days passed in total darkness. No food. No sound. When the door finally opened, Eric was too weak to stand without help. After that, the idea of escape dissolved. He followed orders. He worked. He survived. Days became routines, splitting logs, hauling water from the stream 200 yards away, cooking from cans and whatever Daniels hunted. Eric learned how to skin rabbits and squirrels, how to mend the roof, how to seal gaps in the walls before winter crept in. Slowly, without realizing it, he became someone who no longer remembered what freedom felt like. Daniels spoke little. He issued instructions, inspected the work, occasionally shared practical knowledge about the woods, how to read tracks, how clouds warned of changing weather. He was not violent without cause. He provided food, clothing, shelter. Yet there was something chilling in his distance, as if Eric were not a human being but a function, something to be maintained, not understood. Time blurred under that gaze. There were no calendars. No clocks. Time was measured only by the turning of seasons. Summers passed. Falls faded. Winters were the worst. Snow buried the house nearly to the windows. During those months, Daniels locked Eric in the basement for weeks at a time, releasing him only when work demanded it. The space was damp and freezing, lit by nothing. Eric lay on a thin mattress beneath worn blankets and stared into the dark, thinking about death. Sometimes he wondered if dying early would have been easier than enduring this slow erasure. But something refused to let him stop. Maybe instinct. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe a quiet, unspoken belief that the world could still change. And eventually, it did. In the fall of 2001, Eric could not say exactly when Daniels began to falter. He complained of constant headaches. He stumbled. More than once, Eric saw him grab the wall to steady himself. His speech slurred, words colliding into nonsense. Daniels grew irritable, muttering about exhaustion, about needing rest. On October 3rd, Eric remembered the day clearly. Daniels stayed in bed. Eric brought him water, but he barely drank. That evening, Daniels tried to stand and collapsed onto the floor. Eric approached, asking if he was all right. Daniels looked up at him through unfocused eyes, opened his mouth, and produced only a strained, wheezing sound. Eric understood then. This was it. He didn't know what had happened, stroke, heart failure, something else, but Daniels could not rise. Eric left the room quietly and went to the table. For 12 years, the keys had never been out of reach. Now they lay in the open. He took them, unlocked the door, and ran. He followed the dirt road without knowing where it led. Darkness closed in. The moon barely touched the ground. He ran for what felt like forever, an hour, maybe more, until distant lights appeared. Houses. A gas station. Proof of a world that still existed. Eric stumbled inside and stared at the people there, unable to believe they were real. He asked where he was. North Creek, they told him. A small town in the Adirondacks. He asked for the police. From there, everything accelerated. He was taken to the local station. Albany was contacted. By the next day, Eric was back in the city, giving statements, seeing his parents, stepping into a life that no longer felt familiar. Police moved quickly on the information he provided. The directions were imprecise, only landmarks, distances, a sense of orientation. It took 2 days of searching. On the third, they found it. Deep in the forest, 12 miles from the nearest road, stood the house. It was an old hunting lodge, a single-story structure with a crude extension. The windows were boarded shut. The ground around it was littered with rusted traps, stacked firewood, and abandoned tools, silent evidence of the place where time had been stolen, and where a boy had been hidden from the world. Detectives entered the lodge under warrant, moving carefully through the silence. Inside, they found Charles Daniels collapsed on the floor, alive, but unresponsive. An empty bottle of whiskey lay nearby, tipped on its side like a discarded confession. Paramedics were called, and Daniels was rushed to the hospital. What remained behind confirmed every word Eric had spoken. The basement was no basement at all. It had been transformed into a cage. The walls were lined with plywood, layered with makeshift soundproofing, old carpets, foam, scraps arranged to swallow noise. The door was reinforced with crude metal locks, impossible to open from within. In the room where Eric had lived, the single window was sealed shut. Deep scratches scarred the frame, marks left by hands that had once tested the limits of hope. They found Eric's clothing still there. The Boy Scout uniform he wore the day he vanished, shirt and pants folded neatly in a box, preserved like a relic. Nearby were newspaper clippings documenting his disappearance. Dozens of articles, carefully cut and pasted into an album. Daniels had followed the search. He had watched the world look for the boy he kept hidden. He knew exactly what he had done. On the wall of Eric's room hung a handwritten schedule, nailed in place like scripture. Wake-up times. Assigned tasks. Behavioral rules. At the bottom, a final line stood out, unmistakable in its intent: disobedience will be punished. Escape will result in death. Nothing here was accidental. Everything had been calculated. This was not an impulsive act. It was a system. Forensic teams found overwhelming evidence tying Daniels to the crime. DNA was everywhere: hair, skin cells, traces embedded in objects throughout the house. All signs confirmed that Eric had lived there for years. But the investigation took a darker turn. Analysts also recovered hair samples that belonged to neither Eric nor Daniels. The implication was chilling. Investigators began reopening old files. Over 3 decades, 23 people, mostly teenagers and young adults, had vanished in the Adirondacks. Most cases had never been solved. Exhumations were ordered. DNA comparisons were run. Some samples showed partial similarities to what was found in the house, but none were definitive. The questions multiplied faster than the answers. Daniels never spoke. He was diagnosed with a massive ischemic stroke and remained in a coma under constant guard. Doctors offered little hope. 4 days later, he died without regaining consciousness. With him went the truth, his motives, the full scope of his crimes, the fate of any possible other victims. The silence he left behind was permanent. Eric, meanwhile, faced a different kind of reckoning. Physically, he was severely weakened, 120 pounds on a 5'10" frame. His teeth were damaged from years without proper care. Chronic vitamin deficiencies had taken their toll. His eyesight suffered from endless time spent in dim, enclosed spaces. But the deeper injuries could not be measured. Dr. Morgan worked with him for months, diagnosing severe post-traumatic stress disorder, deep depression, and symptoms consistent with long-term captivity. Eric could not sleep behind closed doors. He insisted they remain open. Enclosed spaces triggered panic. Loud noises made him flinch instinctively. Night after night, he woke screaming, convinced he was still locked in the basement. His parents stood beside him, doing everything they could, but they understood a painful truth. The boy who had gone to summer camp 12 years earlier never came back. In his place stood a man shaped by confinement, stripped of youth, carrying memories that would never loosen their grip. The world noticed. The story flooded national headlines. Reporters surrounded the Langford home, demanding interviews, offering money for exclusives. The family hired legal counsel, erecting barriers to protect what little peace remained. There was no trial. The accused was dead. The case was officially closed, solved, yet unresolved. The Langfords filed a civil suit against Daniels's estate. He left behind a modest house and limited savings. The court ruled in Eric's favor, awarding him $200,000. Every dollar went toward recovery, medical care, therapy, rebuilding what could be rebuilt. 2 decades have passed since Eric Langford returned. Time moved forward, but it did not erase what happened. Some stories do not end cleanly. Some are carried, not concluded. And for those who endure the unthinkable and still step back into the light, survival itself becomes a quiet testament, one not of closure, but of awakening. Today, Eric lives far from attention and headlines. He chose a new name, crossed state lines, and built a life where anonymity offers safety. His work keeps him distant from crowds, technical, solitary, quietly structured. He has a wife. He has a child. His parents say he has relearned how to exist in the world, how to move forward step by step, even though some injuries never fully close. The place where his captivity unfolded no longer stands. By official order, the house hidden in the forest was torn down. The land remains sealed, marked as a crime scene. From time to time, the curious still wander nearby, thrill seekers, online creators chasing shadows of horror, but there is nothing left to find. Only a concrete foundation swallowed by weeds, and the unbroken hush of the trees, as if the forest itself has chosen silence. Eric Langford's disappearance and return became one of the most widely known kidnapping cases in American history. It is now dissected in law enforcement training rooms, cited as a rare example of prolonged captivity and survival against overwhelming odds. Files are studied. Lessons are extracted. Procedures are refined. But for Eric, none of it is academic. It is not a case study. It is 12 years erased from existence. A childhood taken and never replaced. A life diverted by a man whose reasons died with him. It is waking each day carrying memories that refuse to fade, learning again and again how to live alongside them. And it is a warning. Because evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a friendly voice. Sometimes it waits far from cities, beyond roads and witnesses, hidden in places people believe are safe. And sometimes, when someone vanishes, it is not the end of their story, but the beginning of a darkness that stretches on for years, unseen, unheard, and almost forgotten. Until the chosen one finds a way back into the light.